All right, so today's lesson, this is the loving your God with all your mind, how to defend your faith, and this is lesson 7. And today we're going to be talking about the teleological argument. Last week we discussed the cosmological argument, which is basically a proof that God exists because there's something here rather than nothing. We talked about the different somethings. There's life, there's matter, there's space, there's thought. So those things exist. We have to say what caused them, and that was last week's lesson. And so this week we're going to talk about the teleological argument. And the teleological argument, you may have heard it called intelligent design. It's the same argument for God's existence. So telos is a Greek word, and it means end or purpose. And so the basis of the teleological argument is people look at the universe and they say that there appears to be an end or a purpose to the universe. And so, in other words, the universe has a design. And if something has a design, we by definition say, well, it must have a designer. And so if you came across some blocks like this, we've seen these before, you probably wouldn't think that they happened by chance, right? You might think that someone had set those up. And so when we look around at our world, we see things that don't appear to have happened by chance, just like these blocks. So let me read out of the second book in the series, Faith, Fact, and Reason. This is the second one, and it deals with the existence of God. Let me read what he says about someone who's building a block house. Imagine that you walk into an empty room and notice a table with a set of building blocks stacked in the design of a little house. Being in a thoughtful mood, you begin to ponder this situation. The blocks are stacked in an orderly way, yet you did not see anyone arrange the blocks. But the odds against the wind or any other natural force acting on the blocks to produce a house is too improbable. Therefore, it makes sense to conclude that someone had arranged them into the structure of a house. That's the whole basis of the teleological argument. And then he goes further. If you think a little harder, you can even draw some conclusions about the person who constructed the house. The person had a design or a pattern in mind before laying the blocks. He had the proper means. He could physically pick up the blocks. He was strong enough and to place them. And he also had the intelligence to place them in the right way. He had a free will supported by his intellectual ability to carry out the project. So in the end, we conclude that it's not necessary to actually see the person building the blocks to know that someone had built them, to know a lot about them. And so that is the whole, if you can understand that, then you've got the teleological argument under your belt. So Cicero was the first person. Remember, we said the teleological argument is typically couched in the clock. A watch is the typical artifact that we look at. And several people have used this artifact. Cicero was the first person to say, if I come along and I see a sundial, well, let's read what he says. He says, when you see a sundial or a water clock, you see that it tells the time by design and not by chance. How then can you imagine that the universe as a whole is derived of... How then can you imagine that the universe as a whole is devoid of purpose and intelligence when it embraces everything, including these artifacts themselves and their artificers? So, and then other people have gotten a more complex. I think John Locke was the person that said, if I see a watch out in the woods sitting on a rock, I'm going to think that someone put it there. I'm going to think someone designed it. It didn't just happen by chance. So before we get both feet into intelligent design, let's talk about the other side of the table. Let's talk about evolution, because evolution is the predominant theory in opposition to intelligent design. So let's understand what evolution actually says, and then we'll talk about some of the problems with the theory of evolution. And again, evolution says that things evolve into more specific, more complex animals. So here's Charles Darwin. When he was young, he studied science, and he also studied animal breeding. And he talked about different, talked to breeders and asked them how they, were able to select for different traits. And so one of the things that we see today that has a variety of breeds are dogs. And all dogs are derived from some common or some set of common domesticated wolves. So what's so funny? Okay.
I saw a picture of a pug, and yesterday I saw it on jet ski.
Oh, okay. Yeah, dogs are known to do some amazing things. So Charles is talking to the breeders, and he's asking them, how do you achieve these different breeds? And they said, well, we find dogs that have desirable traits, and those are the dogs that we allow to breed. And the ones that have traits that we don't want in our population, we do not allow them to breed. And so those traits get passed on to the next generation and enhanced and more and more prominent. And so through this practice, we have our breeds of cows, we have our breeds of horses, we have breeds of dogs. So we have a bunch of different characteristics out there. So Darwin thought that this was pretty cool, but he was still convinced by the teleological argument, because it was around in his time too. He found the teleological argument to be convincing, and so he was seeking, I think, on how to undo the teleological argument. That's just personal opinion. So here's the HMS Beagle. This is the boat that Darwin sailed on, and he went around observing different environments and different animals. And when he got to the Galapagos, he observed some finches on the Galapagos Islands. And the islands are kind of scattered, and it's not likely that those populations of finches mix between one island and another island. And he noticed that on every island, the finches' beaks were slightly different. They're specialized for the food that they had to eat and the environment that they were in. And so he theorized that instead of human breeders, now we have a natural breeder. That there are certain birds that had traits that allowed them to eat better than the other birds, and those birds that didn't have those traits in their beaks were not as likely to be able to pass on those traits. And over time, the birds that had the beak specialized for their particular island developed, they passed on their traits, and so all the population generally had these specialized type of beaks. He said, if that can happen, whoa, if we have lots and lots of time, then maybe these small changes can add up, we can get new species. That is the basis of evolution. Any questions on that? So there are some problems with evolution. The most glaring problem is, how did it all start? And if you've seen Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, this is the question that Ben would ask all the scientists, and they would get tripped up. Well, where did the first cell come from? And they can't answer that. So the most difficult question is, how did life get started in the first place? And here is our quote-unquote simple prokaryotic blue algae cell, and it's supposed to be the one that got everything started off. Evolution does not answer this question, how did it get started? And evolution cannot answer this question. There's no mechanism in evolution to answer the question of how did it all get started. So this is the biggest problem. And this kind of goes back, kind of ties in loosely with the cosmological argument.